Welcome, everybody, and hi to Tech Leaders in Focus. Now, today we have a session with Andreas Marmaras. We're going to get into it in a second, but first, let me do an Australian custom of acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're all on here in Australia, and I would like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, what is this series about? I know a few people have attended the last few sessions, and there's more coming in 2024, so it's really exciting. Basically, the gist is, of the last few years, there's been a realization that the transition into leadership roles is harder in tech. So I think engineering, design, product, data, cybersecurity, etc. And that's simply because the gap between where our leadership skills are when we're individual contributors and where they need to be when we become leaders is just so much larger than for other functions, because we don't hone the interpersonal and leadership skills as much as people in sales, marketing, and HR while we are individual contributors. And so as a result, once we get into leadership, many of us feel stuck and overwhelmed and don't particularly enjoy it. And it really shouldn't be like that. It doesn't have to be like that. So at Scalable Leaders, we focus on giving leaders in tech that extra support system to unlock their potential, fast track their growth, and avoid the burnout. And it's really designed to be the fastest way for leaders in tech to level up. Now, in this series of fireside chats with established leaders in our tech ecosystem, we want to demystify what the journey into leadership looks like, shine a light on common mistakes, and build an understanding of how leaders are managing the demands of their roles today. If you're watching us live, do put questions into the chat. We'll get around to them at the end, but feel free to get started now. You don't have to wait until it's all until we're done chatting here. And if you're catching us afterwards, do feel free to still leave a comment and ask us questions. Now, with me today, Andreas Marmaras. Welcome, Andreas. Tell us a little bit about your current role and what that even means on a day-to-day basis.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Lovely to be here, and great to have the opportunity to share a little bit. Right, so currently I'm the General Manager of Technology and Product at Domain Insight. And what I do essentially is I lead product, tech, and some data teams, data engineering and data science teams. We work together in order to best leverage and commercialize the wealth we have when it comes to data at Domain. So property data, users, behaviors, and whatnot. So we package everything up neatly and we take it to market for a variety of different use cases. We don't work with the B2C side or the agents. Domain Insight, my business unit works mostly with enterprise, banking, insurance, brokers, and whatnot.
Awesome. All right. And I'm sure it's a product that I think all of us have used at some point. So that's awesome to get a little bit of a glimpse behind the scenes. Now, tell us about sort of your journey. And I will admit, when I was putting together the banner for the event, I did have troubles trying to fit all your leadership roles on it because there have been so many. But tell us a little bit about where you started and how you sort of got to this role.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I was fortunate enough to just fall into the leadership path kind of organically. That goes back, I don't know, maybe 10 plus years when I started leading, being a people manager, leading teams. And that, as you know, this usually happens indirectly or inorganically in the beginning. You influence a certain team, or you lead a vendor or a development team or a product team, whatever that is. And as you kind of slowly prove yourself, you become more credible and people notice. And I was fortunate enough, and also it's going to sound a little bit funny, but I was fortunate enough to have amazing leaders on the journey, but also quite average or bad leaders on the journey, if I'm honest. And I've learned a ton, from both sides, if it makes sense.
Yeah, and same here. I've been very fortunate with some leaders and very unfortunate with others. It's just the name of the game in many ways. Now, tell us a bit about how you got picked as a leader for the first time, and something that came up regularly in the last few chats was sort of the putting your hand up and signaling that you want to be a leader, that you're investing in yourself as leader was quite important. Tell us a little bit of what you did that ultimately led to you getting picked for the leadership role.
Yeah, for sure. Look, for me, leadership comes, I want to say naturally. It's not something that I explicitly pursued or went after. Going back into my, my early years, I was doing a lot of sports, and I was always, captain of the teams and whatnot. And to be honest with you, it wasn't because I had an ego or I was really keen to do it. It just I was being chosen, right? I was good at leading by example. I was very selfless. I was putting myself out in the team always. And I feel like I've always had a bit of ability to just rally the team together, especially when things are tough. And I think that naturally translated into how I operated in my career. I don't know, when things are smooth and everything goes well, we can all be cushy and successful. I think when things get tricky, and they do get tricky a lot, is where I see opportunity. Like, honestly, when I see things going a little bit off, I see this as an opportunity to come in and, drive a little bit of change or put myself forward. And as I mentioned to you, it's just my instinct, right? I'm just grown up like that. I'm very bad at other things, but I think I'm pretty good at just, kind of leading by example. And I think I was very fortunate and lucky that this was noticed by a couple of people that trusted me earlier in my career, and they gave me more formal capacity as a leader. And once you prove yourself, it's easier. I think the first transition is the one that makes or breaks the success of the first few years.
Yeah, indeed. And I see so many people taking a step back from that at some stage when they do get burned out, and that they get thrown into the deep end without adequate support, and realize that, well, gee, this isn't as easy as it looks, and somehow they feel like they're bad leaders and not cut out for it. And I've always have maintained the belief that that's not quite right. There's a lot of people who can be great leaders given the support, given the right context. But it's fascinating, right? So you build your leadership skills from a very young age, and I think leadership skills are so transferable across, like no matter what which function of a business or area of life you try to apply it to. So that's awesome. There's this this book for one of the great investment bankers, who Warren Buffett, actually, who like people started to know him when he started Berkshire Hathaway, or for that business. But he had many years prior experience building businesses, etc. Instead of the same approach. All right, before we get sidetracked too much, when you started as a leader, in business, but also prior, who are some of the leaders that inspired you, and like what were sort of the elements that you tried to incorporate into your own leadership style?
Yeah, great question. Look, I'm not gonna name any names because there's been a few people that I really look up to, and I don't want to single out some or forget some others. But I had a bunch of formal and informal mentors. When I say informal mentors, usually are people that I target in the company, and I kind of lock on, and I'm like, this person is excellent at X or Y or Z. And even without knowing, sometimes I just kind of silently stalk them a little bit and try to learn from them. So very early in my career, I had some people that were actively kind of coaching me and talking to me and mentoring me, and some others just silently obsessing and trying to learn from how do they behave in the meeting, how did they tackle a hard situation, how do they go about identifying commercial opportunity, how they handle a very tough people problem. So I guess my mentality and my philosophy is, I think every person, or almost every person, has something amazing to give you. You have to lock on and learn from that. Equally though, you can't just be a chameleon and just try to be what every other person thinks you should be. You got to have your own brand and identity. And something I've learned about 5-10 years ago. In the beginning, I was trying to be very much like a book I read, or very much like a person that I look up to. And I realized that as a leader, you do need to have some opinions. You do need to have your own brand. It's not going to work for everyone. It's not going to work for every company, but it's important to absorb and learn, but equally have your DNA and be comfortable in it.
Yeah, awesome. We're going to talk about your brand and principles in a little bit in the next section. But first of all, tell us a little bit about when you first started being a leader in tech. What were some of the things that you did well, but also what were some of the mistakes that you made early on that, with hindsight, you'd be like, I should have done that differently.
Yeah, look, in terms of attributes that I've carried through over the decades. Speaking of decades, I was doing an interview and someone told me in an interview, oh yeah, I've been in this for a quarter of a century. And I realized, oh my God, I'm getting old. I'm in the game for a quarter of a century now. But anyway, things that I've carried forward since then has to be, leading by example and not being afraid of challenges and putting my hand up. And, I will never ask my teams to do anything that I wouldn't do. If it's an early problem, I'll be with them and trying to solve it with them. If it means I need to go get back into, coding or learning a new language or whatever that's a new framework, I'll just dive right into them with them. And that's some of the aspects that I've been carrying with lead by example and, don't be afraid of the challenges. Some of the things that I've learned and calibrated over the years have to do with optimizing for who do I serve? Right? Who do I serve in a business as a leader? Do I serve my board, my executive team? Do I serve my people that report to me, my peers at different functions? And I feel like I've been learning by mistake, if I'm honest, optimizing one way or another, and then figuring out that, balance and equilibrium is super important. Like you need to be respected and you need to work. And this is the challenge. You need to work for all these tiers horizontally and vertically equally effectively. If you optimize one or the other, you optimize so much for board and executive and business outcomes, you're probably gonna lose your team. You optimize for your team, you're probably gonna look like driving business strategy as much. So this calibration of all the tiers being equally effective is important, but very, very difficult. And that's something I've learned the hard way. Look, other mistakes have to do with trusting, not trusting, or over trusting. And I think Harry, my good friend Harry, mentioned a couple of things in the previous chat. I would say people and how you manage people, how you lead people is super tricky. They're all very different and goes back to what I mentioned about have your own brand, be fair, but equally do not try to optimize in isolation for every different case. Have some consistency in how you approach things, and that has served me pretty well in my career.
Awesome. All right, and well, certainly I can identify with a bunch of things you mentioned there. Great. Okay, so we're going to summarize these points, by the way, as usual in our short summaries. I'm sure this will feature. Decisions, not easy, even if you have sort of your principles figured out as a leader and your brand and what you stand for and who you want to serve. What have been some of the hardest decisions that you've had to make?
Yeah. Look, a series of them. For me, the toughest decisions are usually the ones that involve people's prosperity or lives or career or progression, right? Because I'm very commercial. I love growth. I love, kicking goals when it comes to business, to, exponential growth and expansion. I love it. But I know for a fact this is only the consequence and the outcome of a happy, effective team underneath. And as a leader, especially when you have big organizations in the dozens or in the hundreds, right? Sometimes you just have to make calls that serve the majority, but really hurt a specific, number of people. And I had a hard time in the beginning, always empathizing and relating and thinking, person X has a family, or they just had a baby, or they bought a new house. And I know all that because I spend a lot of time with people. I know, I invest in them and the personal life, but there's been a lot of hard calls that I had to optimize for the 80, 90%. Not necessarily being unfair to the 10%, but knowing that the 10% might suffer or lose their job or, go down a strange path. And look, we spoke a little bit about it offline. By far, I think the hardest thing I had to do as a decision, as a goal, was just shutting down our previous scale up with the rest of the executive team, different successful company, very, very amazing set of people, and we just had to shut it down. Everybody lost their job, and in a way that was, disrupting and sudden. And let me tell you, it's rough. Like, no matter what you've done in your career, going through this is very eye-opening.
Yeah.
So definitely the hardest thing, I'd say.
Yeah, I empathize with that. I mean, we're going to have next year, we're going to have Yaniv Bernstein as one of the people speaking. And so I had a brief chat with him. And one of the things he says was actually the decision of letting people go is easy. It's just the execution that is hard and emotionally taxing. And so we'll explore that more with him next year. But I've been in a similar boat where at a scale up, I was leading a team and cash was tight. And so there was a period of about 6 months where we weren't sure whether we're going to make it or not. And we had the cash flow was a little bit uneven. So there was even a time where I had to lead 20 people through them not getting paid for 6 weeks. And they were incredibly loyal. And obviously we tried to counter some of the impact of that with culture, but there's only so much you can do through culture that's going to help someone pay a mortgage, right? So, but we had an incredible team and none of them left. And at the end, we still had to make everyone redundant. And so I think you did the same I did, which is, well, first and foremost, as a leader, because you have that like view and you can see things coming a little bit more than others. It's about helping people to land on their feet and knowing that, all right, if you do right by people as a leader, good things are going to come your way as well, rather than being, the captain that jumps off the ship and lets everyone drown.
Yeah, look, just to add to that, I spent a fair amount of energy and time into setting everyone up the best I could. And people were like, oh, thank you for doing this. And I was like, I'm not doing you a favor. Like, I brought you into this company. I trusted you. You trusted me. And I feel like the least I can do as a leader is to help you, set up. And I knew these people would be amazing at any other company anyway, so I wasn't doing them a favor. They thanked me, but I didn't see it this way. I saw it as a core accountability of mine.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, let's start talking about founders a little bit, because sometimes I wish founders had sort of a similar attitude, but often they're off to the next thing. You and I have both worked with startups, scale ups, with founders directly, and often. And this is not having any one particular person in mind, and certainly I've been a founder myself. I know what it's like. Often founders don't prioritize like leadership and management as much as maybe would be good in some cases. So then often we as executives and leaders working directly under founders sort of act as a little bit of a buffer almost between the founders and doing their thing and then us trying to be competent leaders to our team. How did you find that challenge and deal with it? And I mean, generally, for some people on the team, what did you find it being like to work directly with founders as a leader?
Yeah. Well, great question. Look, I've worked with more than 15 founders, so anything I say cannot trace back to anyone. But look, founders are these amazing human beings. Like, the level of belief and dedication and craziness you need to have just to go against all odds and start something from scratch is just amazing. I wish I was more like that. I tried to set up a couple of things, and I'm good at certain things, but not amazing at others. So I have a ton of admiration, for them. In terms of what you mentioned, I think founders are professionals and humans that scaled inorganically or scaled by necessity rather than by design. And what this means is they end up in situations where sometimes they're victims of their own success and exponential growth. They haven't had the time to really hone the skills as as a professional CEO or as a professional CTO, whatever that is, and they found themselves in situations where their nature is, I'm a builder or I'm a grower and I want to do what I'm great at, but at the same time I have like 200, 300 people that rely on me right now. And the transition is just hard. It's hard for anyone. So what I've done is, whenever I get into a company with an established founder, my main kind of principle is I'm not going to pretend to know your industry and your vision and your, the company you build better than you, but let me get in and execute for you. Let me create the buffer. Let me create the space for you so you spend your time in what matters. Because I think this is the key. Founders tend to spread their time evenly among impactful and impactful activities just because of what they're used to. And I think building the trust and the buffer to, hey, I'm here, let me take control of this, or let me kind of drive this for you. You go and focus on what's the most impact. There's only one of you. You're the most important person in this company. You don't need to be in every Slack conversation, in every Jira ticket, in every mini, decision, in every sprint. So let the team organize for that, and then you focus on what matters. So this just works for me. It's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but hopefully with discipline in execution, the trust is built and it becomes second nature.
You touched on a couple of things there. It's the founders knowing what they're great at, and obviously that's often a real asset to the company. But we talked at the beginning about people in tech. The gap to leadership is larger, and one of the concepts that I like to think about is in tech, our skills, they are out of date so quickly, right? And so as individual contributors, we're not just building a skill, but we also have to maintain it and keep it up to date. And if we think about an engineering manager, that doesn't go away, right? If you were an engineering manager 10, 20 years ago, and now you're working on being a leader, and you don't know anything about the cloud or AI, your skills are going to be much less in demand. And so you have sort of that, you need to build up a leadership skill as you become a leader, but you also still have to maintain your old skill. And then the higher you go up at executive level or even VP level, like you and I, you need to build the commercial skills as well. So you sort of have three areas that you need to build and maintain. And with founders, there's then another few levels that often they haven't been exposed to in the past: managing shareholders, managing a board, raising investment, being CFOs, their own CFOs at least for a little while, and so forth. So there is there's all sorts of skills that they need to build up, and some of them, a lot of them have their own passions as well and sort of want to stick to it. So it's actually very, very similar problems to the problems we discuss in terms of like the transition to leadership in tech.
And Ben, look, you touched on it. Like when you force yourself to be good at something, you can only fake it for so much. Let's face it. Like you're only consistently amazing at things that you're passionate about and you're great at. If you force yourself to be something that you can fake it for a year or two, but you're going to end up hating yourself. And I've seen people that they're trying to be amazing at areas that they're not, natural to them, and they just,
Yeah, well, so that's where I think that in many ways the leadership program that we run at Scalable Leaders comes in. I found that it's these kind of situations, skill building, instead of that initial transition, figuring out their own brand and their own leadership style is really challenging for them. And so what we provide there is three pillars really. The first one is sandbox sessions where people can practice, role play, talk through challenges that they're experiencing in a safe environment and sort of bypass the mistakes of just testing and prod, which can sometimes be hard to come back from. It's a community of peers that's like 24/7 support, like on Stack Overflow or Dribble, if you like, if you're a designer, and a playbook that helps people find sort of their own principles and approach. And it's all been carefully put together with insights from people who worked in leadership roles at Google and Atlassian and Culture Amp. And one of our advisors has been a global top 100 HR leader recently elected. And so whether you join a leadership program or not, I always found the most important thing is when you want to build that skill, right, of being a leader and figuring out who you are as a leader, you need a strategy for your growth. And so that's one of the things that we actually offer for people for free. If anyone on the call is interested, you can head to scalableleaders.com/call and get a growth strategy. Whether our program is for you or not, let's work things out and let's make your life easier. If you've got any ambitions in terms of leadership in 2024, let's jump on a call. Availability is only from January. We're booked out for this year. Let's bring this back to you, Andreas. So and let's talk about your brand of leadership and who you are today. What's the good and the bad that your team today can expect from you and anyone who brings you on board to take care of a team? What's it like?
Yeah, good question. And I hope my perception is aligned to what other people would say about me. I hope. But look, I'm very, very fair. Fairness is very, very important to me. And
Mm,
being fair with people, with functions, with businesses, but also with decisions and criticism versus praise. I am very, very consistent when I give praise, and I'm very consistent when I ask for my team to do more, right? So
mm,
I'm very principled when it comes to that. I believe in equal opportunity. I believe in diversity when it comes to thinking and executing. I tend to
mm,
never hire two of the same. I always believe that people have superpowers and they're different to each other. And if I bring enough amazing humans with different superpowers by osmosis, the team becomes bigger,
mm.
right? Um, I'm very insight driven, very data driven. Hence I'm leading a data business right now. But yeah, very insight driven, insight over opinion, very important to me. Some of the probably the good things, and I do love to give opportunity to people to grow. As I told you before, I'm not a hippie, but I'm very commercial. But business growth means an effective team. An effective team means a happy team, and a happy team means
Yeah.
people believe they're in a win-win situation where they're learning and growing, but at the same time kind of giving back to the business. Look, conversely, if I'm honest, I can be demanding sometimes. Like I never settle. I like to push myself in the team, and
Mm,
I call it continuous improvement. Some of my people might call it, you're hard ass and always ask for more. So I'm not the easiest person to please. So I push myself in the teams to do better every day. And I think I have a bias to action, which is amazing at times, but not great at others. So I believe these are a couple of the areas that consistently have been, you know, not universally accepted by everyone.
yeah. Yeah. No. Awesome. And it's actually funny what you mentioned about hiring. It's a conversation I had a few times, and as when we put the program together was a big point where I wanted to sort of understand. Okay, well, how do people at Google Hire and Atlassian and so forth? And actually, the approach that I see in the wild way too often is when leaders put their first few JDs together, they just look elsewhere and copy and paste, and they don't necessarily they might try to hire the same archetype over and over again. And actually, that lack of diversity in thinking and in everything else is going to be your downfall as a leader, because it means your blind spots just aren't covered, and the thinking in the group is too homogenous. So I love the fact that you mentioned that, because that's been a big part of the module that we put together on that.
Yeah, look, I have a very good friend, and he tells me that at peacetime, homogeneous thinking is comfortable, but at
mm,
wartime, it's diverse thinking that will save your ass. So
mm.
always stuck with me.
Yeah, there's probably a comment to be made about what it's like at the moment in corporate Australia, right? Where we benefit, benefit I don't know, but where we have a lot of duopolies, right? Or like very few players, like in the banking space, etc. It I don't really sense wartime there, but I do sense a lot of non-divergent thinking. That's that might be hurting innovation and maybe our global position as a country and our global competitiveness as well. But we'll see how we go over the next few years on that. Now, over the last few years, a lot of teams have become a lot more flexible with whether people need to be on the office or work from home. I don't know if this is the domain office behind you, a nice living room in their space, or if you're working from home. How did you adapt to sort of having less face-to-face time with the team, people working remotely, but you're not able to get spontaneous on the whiteboard with your whole team and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I pride myself in empathizing with all the different people and personas in my team. Like I take a lot of
Mm,
pride in trying to really understand the humans behind the professionals, right? And
mm,
when this whole COVID business started, I was a campaign monitor, I remember, and I was fortunate enough that when we transitioned into fully remote, I already had a very, very strong rapport and bond with my team. So it was a much easier transition to go from like, I know the team, we spend a lot of time together, and now we're remote, but I know them all as human beings. And I can pick when they're upset, when they're tired, when they're frustrated, when they're getting stressed, right? I could see the signals. When I started in new companies, and some people I have met or I've met only once in the span of a year, I really had to train myself into understanding their signs when I talk to them one-on-one or as a team. I feel like you need to spend more energy being more tuned in to understand when a person is getting upset or tired when you're remote. I think, look, you have to obviously spend the energy and the time to build the human relationship, I believe. And I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't easy for me. Like, I was very worried. Like, starting in companies fully remote, I was like, am I gonna be a good leader? Can I do this? I felt like I'm old school, and I thought I'm gonna have like imposter syndrome, and I kind of made it work. It was a combination of empathy, relationship, and systems, and putting the right processes and optimizing for a hybrid environment that we're operating in. But yeah, it's a very deliberate transition, and I feel like it's a little bit more expensive in energy and cognitive load. Leading a hybrid team, everybody in the office, okay. Everybody remote, okay. I think hybrid is where we stabilized, and you just have to be very methodical about running and leading a hybrid team.
Yeah. Do you have team members that are fully remote that you've never seen in the office?
We do. I got the team together, maybe a few weeks ago, and we flew some people in from around Australia, and they met for the first time. I met them for the first time. It was amazing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, human interaction is human interaction. We're wired for fun being together, I think. But we have the right systems and processes and tools in place to lead a hybrid team. So I'm not too worried about it, but at the same time, every now and again, I'd love to get the team together.
Yeah, I agree with you that in-person time, you can't really replace it with anything else. As long as there is a social element. I find what I've recently experienced is sometimes you just come into the office to sit in front of a computer on Zoom meetings all day. Like, then the face-to-face time becomes actually just an additional drain rather than even any more effective. Let's go into sort of the systems and tools a little bit, but just a shout out to everyone online. We're going to get into your questions in a second, so start jotting them down. Otherwise, I will never get bored of asking Andreas questions and getting knowledge and insights out of his brain. But yeah, chuck him in there. So you mentioned tools and processes and or maybe rituals. What are your best practice to involve those remote only team members and make sure that there's still a social fabric that they are weaved into?
Yeah, I think inclusion is very important. So there's cases where we have, I don't know, 5 people in the office in front of a whiteboard and 1 person remote. If you make the mistake of like, oh look, we're just going to draw here on the whiteboard and kind of point a dodgy camera at this and pretend that you see what we're doing, you've lost them, right? So very, very mindful of, if 1 person or 2 people are kind of remote, everybody needs to adhere to online collaboration tools. So being very inclusive about it. Look, the modern tech stack in terms of collaborating remotely, I think it's pretty effective. So I'm not going to go into the variety of different tools that we have. But telemetry is super important as well. Telemetry when it comes to measurement and continuous improvement. I had a case with my team now at Domain where we've introduced a bunch of instrumentation and sprint health and a bunch of other metrics. And usually when you introduce stuff like that, especially for the tech teams, there's a little bit of change management and resistance. But truly, if you really want to prove the case of consistency and effectiveness and efficiency of a team and continuous improvement in an environment where we're not going to have a ton of human interaction, we all need to refer back to metrics that matter to us. And I'm not just talking about business metrics or cadence, predictability, and whatnot. I'm also talking about happiness and retro and how the team is performing. Some people, for better or worse, are not going to be online, or they're going to have the cameras off, which I'm not a big fan of, by the way. But yeah, being able to continually and consistently measure how the team is performing and feeling is the way to go.
Your point on, like, if there's one or two people remote, then everyone needs to do this, like creating a level playing field, that is so important, and I try to introduce that in so many companies. But often what we're still stuck with is not enough meeting rooms, right? Which is then people have like are on a laptop in an open plan office next to marketing or sales that are pretty loud, and there's a lot of background noise, and you just can't hear yourself properly, or your brain is working overtime trying to filter the background noise out. Or people do get into a meeting room, but you've got a really shitty meeting equipment where the microphone, like you need to hand it around so you can actually hear people, and that's not going to happen. And the camera is just so small, and you don't even know who's actually in the room, and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of etiquette that's actually not hard, and still I feel like people are not doing it, and then it's you're just really like having on paper a policy that says, sure, people can work from home, or we're happy to have people remote, but in practice you're punishing them, and you just don't have that level playing field, and that's ultimately going to be more I think a headwind than you're really making most out of the opportunities of hybrid and remote. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of companies that ultimately make the kind of say, you know what, we're just going to go back to in person. We can't deal with that much change, and I guess that's fair too. Just creates more differentiation in the employer market. All right. Now we do have a couple of questions, which is awesome. I'll get to them in a second. I just want to ask you one or two more. One is leadership. I mean, it is inherently stressful, right? And you already talked a lot about all the different factors you're trying to keep in mind, on top of obviously being an expert in product and technology and guiding decisions in a competent way. So how do you manage the like yourself to like stay sane in these kind of roles?
Am I managing? It's it's an interesting question. Look, this is a classic case of do as I say and not as I do, because I'm gonna admit I'm not perfect at it, right? I'm not even great at it. I'm not even good enough sometimes. I have this weird brain where I get bored, and the more busy I am, the more busy I keep my brain, the less stressed I get, which is bizarre. For example, I remember one night, I think my wife had a bit of like a crazy moment when I was at home late at night. I think it was 9:30 p.m. And I think you're going to laugh with this. I had a show on TV. At the same time, I was playing something on my Nintendo Switch, and next to me, I think I had my phone. I was running like a slow poker tournament. I was playing poker while on my Switch and watching something on TV. And my wife's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Look, this is what works for me. This is what keeps me calm."
Yeah.
But look, very important to do things that are important to you, that make you feel good. Your body is important. I've neglected mine sometimes for periods of busyness, but being balanced with your body, your soul, and not losing track of why you're doing what you're doing. For example, I have young kids, I have demanding jobs and whatnot. If I devote all my energy into everyone else, I'm gonna go down first. So I would say to people, do not feel bad doing things for you. Go out, meet your friends, play football, watch a movie, do stuff that are silly. Watch silly shows. And I watch Greek MasterChef. And my wife is like, "Why are you watching this trash on TV?" It's like, you know what? That's how I switch off my brain. So that's how I manage. But yeah, I'm gonna admit I'm not amazing at it.
Well, look, it's actually there's a lot of research on the different types of brains, neurodiversity being the keyword at the moment. But some brains just actually excel when there's a certain kind of stimulation in the background, or higher stimulation, whereas other brains really struggle with certain kinds of simulation, right? And that's part of the reason why some people absolutely love the transition to working from home, because they can't deal with the simulation. Maybe it's the the bright lights or the background chatter in the office, and they might deal better with watching a TV show or a movie that they've seen before, etc. And it just that gets like switches the some of the noise generating parts in their brain off and helps them to focus. So what you're describing there is, I think, it's definitely not crazy at all. It works for so many people, and you just have to figure these things out of how your brain works and actually embrace that. So kudos to you, mate, on sharing that, and B, just embracing it and figuring out that that's just works for you, right? For other people is listening to the same song for hours and hours on time, and it's we all have our thing. So, and that's just like part of evolution, just giving us different brains, and it's actually what helped us as a species survive. So kudos, mate. All right, last question from me, and then we're gonna get to the chunk of questions online. So best advice for emerging leaders, for anyone who's recently started or a leadership role, or is about to or wants to get into leadership. What would you tell them?
Yeah, look, I'm sure this might have come across in the previous conversations you had with other very established leaders, but do the right things for the right reasons. We used to be in an ecosystem where being a manager, it was so cool, and you'd make a lot of money and whatnot. That's not the case. Like, I've seen engineering managers and heads of tech and heads of product that are actually paying individual contributors more money than they make. So what I mean by that is, a leadership career and a management career is not the single purpose. It's not like the quintessential path in life and work, right? Be cognizant of what makes you tick. Be cognizant of what you're great at. Obviously, I encourage people to be more homogeneous and more kind of universal with the skill set and cover areas of weakness. But I think as humans, we tend to get stuck and be amazing at the things that we excel. So for the young and aspirational leaders, have faith, have confidence, break some things along the way. Just break some things. It's okay, as long as you don't break people. But break some things, make some wrong decisions, and just make sure you surround yourself with mentors and coaches and frameworks that help you grow. We've all made mistakes. I've made a fair amount of mistakes in my time. I think it's how quickly you identify them, how quickly you learn, how quickly and how effectively you have a network of people and support around you to coach you through how you overcome them. So these are the few snippets I would share, but this is not, leadership is not for everyone. Yes, a lot of the skills are coachable, but do the right things for the right reasons. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? And if you get good, honest, answers and instincts, then go for it.
That's something that we can work out in the strategy call as well. But one thing that you just mentioned, really important point actually, confidence, right? When I was younger, I remember in school we were talking about this, like, confidence, like either you have it or you don't. But actually, once I read into it, there's a whole bunch of science around like how you can build confidence for yourself, and fairly straightforward steps that you can take to build confidence. And it doesn't mean everyone becomes a macho, but who has a lot of unearned confidence, right? But yeah, it ended up being one of the modules that we put together for the program. All right, now let's get to some of the things from online. So first of all, Matko, this one is just a comment, but brilliant attitudes towards people and teams in tough times and having to make tough decisions. So very rare, but kudos to you from Matko. And I think in a similar vein, Dimitri has a comment here. Just culture and relationships, when they're strong, it makes the transition so much easier, so much smoother. Thanks for that, Dimitri. Now we have a question from Joyce. Hi, Joyce. What are the activities what activities do you use to bond with team members? And I'm thinking that came up during the remote session. So Yeah, especially considering sort of a remote and hybrid environment, if you can touch on that.
Yeah, look, there's an array of different, icebreakers, activities, and bonding, things you can find online. I try to. It's interesting, right? Just to give you my raw thoughts on this one. Some teams are much better at this than others, and usually the more extroverted, more outgoing teams tend to be more cognizant about spending time as a team, just as bonding. My challenge has been with a more introverted composition of teams, where they're all business, they just like to put the head down and just get stuff done, and they don't acknowledge the fact that bonding and spending downtime with the team, just talking to each other as a human, is valuable. So I usually try to find good examples that we had a hard time, or we had to bond together as a team, or we had to stay late to get a release right. And on the back of this, I'm trying to set up some downtime a week or two later with just bonding as humans and kind of having a drink and discussing about it, because I truly believe the best bonding and engagement happens through amazing success or very, very tricky situations and failure. And I'm just trying to embrace it. Like, hey, we're stuffed up. Okay, let's get stuff done. Let's solve what we need to do. And then a week or two later, not just in retro, more like, hey, let's have a drink. Hey, what's happened here? What could have done later, and let's have some fun and celebrate that we got on the other side, and how we can move forward.
Yeah, awesome. And it's actually interesting you touch on the retro there. In terms of the activities, keen to hear your view, but I've always found that it's actually really important to have at least some of these social bonding activities during work hours, as opposed to making it just an after work thing. Multiple reasons. One is it sort of doesn't do right by people who are primary carers, maybe for elderly parents or young family members, etc., or who just have a what just happened? Am I still there? Right, all my screens just went black. So in terms of creating equity, it tends to help, but also building the culture, building the connections, making work more efficient. It is actually a work effort. So I always found it's fair to at least have some activities during work hours. What's your take, especially given the remote and hybrid and sort of flexible work arrangements?
Look, activities for bonding and engagement are part of work. They are not, let's meet 9 p.m. If you can make it, if you can find a nanny for your kids, you can join us. No, this is part of work. And people need to acknowledge that having this time with the teams will pay back dividends exponentially over the long run. So again, I strike myself as having a good balance between people, empathy, and commercial outcomes, but I'm super cognizant that you can't have business wins, company wins, without the teams feeling at home and safe. So absolutely part of the work, I would say.
Awesome. I realize I have some camera issues. Oh, there we go. I'm trying to resolve them. All right. So next question from Richard. I have to lean in here to read this on my smaller screen. What has been your biggest failure in terms of project or people decisions as a leader, and what did you take from it throughout your whole career?
Yeah, look, I spoke a fair bit about people, but speaking about business, one of the big mistakes that I've done several years back was I spent a lot of time with the team building an amazing new product proposition for a market. It wasn't the Australian market, it was a different market. Innovation, greenfield, we went super hard on building top-notch flows and activities. And we took it to market, and we just realized the market wasn't there. Like, it wasn't ready. Like, the market was like 3 years behind us. And it was such an expensive mistake to make, right? And it just hit me that we could have been so much more meticulous when it comes to validation and focus groups and whatnot. In constrained environments, B2C, mass B2C to B2B to B2 enterprise, very different techniques and methods. In B2C, you have faster loops and more data. It's a longer discussion. I'm going to distract the discussion. But when it comes to enterprise, and especially constrained enterprise, you always have to innovate at the pace that your customers can absorb, right? And some banks, for example, or big institutions, they're inherently slower for good reason. or bad reason, but
Mm.
innovation needs to be packaged up in a backwards compatible mode. I call it innovation in a box, but it's a longer discussion.
Yeah, awesome. Alrighty. And I think, I mean, everyone in product probably had a similar experience where we just spent too long working on something and needed faster feedback loops. And I found myself it's similar as a leader. I've worked on some things like emails that needed to be sent, or some things, like in isolation for a really long time. It was a presentation, etc. And actually, even for me as a leader, having feedback loops doesn't mean with production, but whether it's with mentors or with peers or with coaches, etc., is actually super important. And I realize it's through one of my favorite books, Peak, by Eric Anderson, I think, which talks about how we as humans learn and build expertise and master things. If we think about how we would learn an instrument, right? We wouldn't just take an instrument, get up on stage and start performing in front of a bunch of people. And we'd go into a practice room. We'd, maybe get some lessons, maybe, some cheat sheets, learn some, principles on how to play this instrument efficiently. And so I found at the end of the day, there's just a fairly structured way on how we humans master things. And that applies across everything. And leadership is just another skill. But as you mentioned earlier, it's also a career pivot in some ways, right? So helps if you get started on it before you actually take that step. All right, we've got a question from Dave Wang here, who wants to go one step forward to what I asked you about, emerging leaders. What advice would you give your mid-20-year-old when you started your career in terms of advice, I suppose in the context of ending up in a leadership role later on?
Yeah, look, I think more humility. I was a little bit more aggressive when I was younger, right? And a lot of that, it's a longer story, but my time at the Greek Air Force in the Army really helped me with just being a bit more humble and less aggressive with decisions and approach. So more humility, have more respect for everyone's opinion. One of the things that I wasn't doing very well early in my career was I was ambitious and aggressive, and I wasn't really getting the most out of the more introverted people in the room. I thought, look, if they have nothing to say, they have nothing to say, but that's very rarely the case. You really have to unpack and unlock the knowledge from the people that are a little bit more, perceptive and more introverted. They don't want to kind of shout and be loud in the room. Just create your own brand. I would say, I'm not saying everybody go out on Instagram and have 1 million followers, but be comfortable in what you are and what you're not. I'm not perfect, far from. I'm good at certain things. I'm not good at others, but this is my value proposition, and I'm very upfront and transparent with this to my employers, present, past, and future. And I'm not perfect for every environment, but I'm good enough for where there's chemistry.
Yeah, awesome. All right, we've got one more question from Joyce. Any tips for asynchronous collaboration in terms of projects in and bonding in general?
Yeah, have a very consistent stack of collaboration tools across the board, all the way from road mapping, whiteboarding, documenting and whatnot. I know teams hate documentation, async, and when it comes to remote teams, a decision that is not written down is a decision that wasn't made. So be meticulous. If you have a big meeting and you make some calls on how to move forward, just make sure everything is noted down. And when it comes to collaboration, as you mentioned, get people together remotely, push people to have the camera on. I know it's uncomfortable for some, but you know what? I keep saying this to my teams. When things get rough, it will be the culture and our human connections that will keep us going through the night or through, a very tough period. It's not going to be the bonus at the end of the year or whatever, the OKR somewhere. you have to build the momentum and the rapport with the team when things are good to capitalize when things are rough. I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's fascinating. The the documentation part. It's I must admit I was very spoiled early on in my career when I worked at Atlassian, because kudos to the business. They do. I think they started working remotely. If I have my history right here, a few years into actually existing as a business. Yeah, like hiring an engineering team in Poland, being based here, where there's very little time overlap. And of course they're the builders of Confluence, and so they use it internally like no other company I've ever seen. I think Notion might be changing that. It certainly is a game changer for a few companies. But yeah, the difference it makes to create a level playing field for no matter whether people are remote, what time zone they work in, what hours of the day they are productive when you do documentation well, is incredible. And I believe it's one of the things that's still fueling the business today, and in many ways. All right, we have one last question from Nurjan, and then we'll need to wrap it up. Any advice for a product leader who's looking more and more into a tech leadership role? I assume that means having engineers report to them as well.
Yeah, great question. And I think I don't know if Harry spoke about it. Harry was one of the first kind of CPTOs in Australia, and I was one of the fairly early people where I went into roles with product and tech and a bunch of other things. So I was very deliberate about it, in the sense that I've realized that breadth is super important right now. Now, don't get me wrong. Right now, I have product and engineering and data engineering, and I have some other functions kind of dotted line to me, like data science. I'm not amazing at everything. Like the other day, I went and started coding in Python just to build some predictive models, just so I can empathize what my team is going through. Right. So
yeah,
being hands-on. If you have free time, spend it in getting back on the tools. When I get myself too remote from the tools, I start getting stressed. I feel like I'm becoming relevant. You know what I mean? So if I spend a few years where I'm like, oh my God, I haven't written a single line of code in X, in my free time, I'll just go and set up a couple of tools here and start coding at home. So stay relevant, stay in the know, expand your breadth, but also, let's face it, you're not going to be amazing at product and tech and data and design and everything. But having enough ammunition to lead the team effectively and empathize with their challenges is a minimum viable, skill, I would say, to lead those teams.
Yeah, awesome. Alrighty, we do have to wrap it up here. I know there's one or two more questions online. Maybe we can get to them afterwards. But first of all, thank you so much, Andreas. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you and to share so much knowledge and insight from your decades of experience. Thank you so much. We will get to we'll hopefully get to the questions afterwards. And to everyone else as well, thank you so much for joining. It's really your curiosity and investing in yourself as leaders and mastering leadership that's going to be an asset to our ecosystem. And I think that's been pretty clear from a lot of things said today of how important that is to create a great environment for everyone in tech. Our next fireside chat will be, I haven't officially announced it yet, but you hear it first here, is on the 16th of January with Klaus Reitmakers, who used to be at Stan, who used to be at a few other companies, and who will bring a lot of great insights into the series. You'll find I'll put the link in the event, and you'll find it if you follow the Scalable Leaders page and events. If there's any leaders in the ecosystem that anyone here wants to hear from, do mention them in the comments or ping me a message, and we'll try to get them on and hear from them. And just a reminder, you can get a free session to work on your leadership strategy and like really look at your goals over the next year as a leader. Even if leadership, how do you figure out if leadership is the right step for you? Just head to scalableleaders.com/call and set something up for the next year. Now, very last, I'll hand it over again to you, Andreas. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience? Anything else you've got on your mind that they should know about, hear about? Any projects you're working on?
Look, I just want to thank you. It's been amazing sharing some of my thoughts. They're not perfect, but they're decades of scar tissue and experience. And I just want to say that I love watching and observing the Australian tech and product ecosystem grow and evolve. We have so much talent, and the companies and the people are getting so much better at running tech companies. So I'm just very, very pleased to see the evolution. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and always great to chat with you.
Nice. Thank you so much. I know we'll keep chatting more. Thanks to everyone online, and I'm happy to report that whatever happened to my system was just a power outage. No ghost in the machine. All right. Thanks everyone. You have a great day. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And I hope I see pretty much all of you back for the next session in the new year. See you, everyone.